You're listening to Building Character, an audiobook by Ballerscheff, read by the author Ballerscheff. Last New Year's, he swore he would finish a marathon, and because he had chosen this one, he had to finish it. He may as well make it worth his time. When he made a promise, he held himself to it. It was like a threat, as if he had said, "And if you don't, or else." Now he had to show what would happen when his if and or were called into question. Running was good for the mind. He remembered his school's preacher once saying so before some event. He had related it to monks or to atonement in a way Stephen couldn't recall. Suffering is good for the body and for the mind and for the spirit, something like that. Maybe that was true. He certainly couldn't worry about anything but the here and now when running. He kept a slow but constant pace, just like he should, he thought, too tired to pat himself on the back for it. Lots of people had overtaken him, and lots more had run off at the very beginning, when their sun was tolerable rather than hateful. It hadn't changed, but he had. He wouldn't see those runners in the front again until the finish line. They'd be waiting, and, so he hoped, cheering with tired voices. If there were dark clouds above him that threatened to rain, he could hope and also dread that they would, but the sun stayed where it was. At first, being slow wounded his pride. He could feel the pain in his heart, just as he felt it in his sides. He put an arm around himself to help, swinging his other arm back and forth to keep up his rhythm. When all the runners had found their places, his goal changed from being in the top 10, then the top 20, then 30, 40, and 50, to just getting to the finish line. Similarly, he defined and redefined his goal. The finish line became just up to that tree, and that became just up to there, and then the next thing up ahead of him. The other runners, those just in front, behind, or beside him, encouraged him, and he encouraged them. It was best to run slow. He should be able to talk, though he shouldn't really do that. Save his breath. If he had to talk, think instead. Most of the course ran through the city's busy streets. There were still people there, but some were shopping, crossing the street only when the police said they could, so as not to hinder the runners, and some were watching the race. They cheered when he and his group came around the corner, then waited for more runners to arrive and cheered them on. Was it only a week ago that he had ran past this jeweler? Yes, he could see the window someone had cracked, but not smashed. What an effort it must have been to clear all these streets. Running made him prone to mood swings, loosened him up physically and emotionally for big feelings he would normally be too reserved to even consider. How nice the city was to do all this for them. He didn't know who to thank, so he thanked everyone, even that failed window smasher, even the people waiting their turn to cross the street, and the cop who kept them there. By the time he got to the finish line, he might weep from gratitude and swear loyalty to whoever first gave him water and a donut. In preparation, he had run the distance from his house to his local mall every day, back and forth, keeping his pace by force of will. Some of the people who watched later did the same. The moment he crossed his driveway, which he defined as the finish line, and then slowed to a walk, you could see his legs shake. His balled fists opened, flapping limply to the rhythm he had kept during his run. He put his hands on his hips and turned his head up, seeing the stars above and believing that their twinkle meant they were as tired as he was. He was as sure of this as everyone else in the world looking at the night sky was of whatever meaning they ascribed to it. Before all that, he bought new running shorts, shoes, and a light breathable shirt. His training had helped, but not as much as he expected or wished it would. The committee in charge of the race had announced the route ahead of time. The barricades barring cars came later. He had run that route too and timed himself. That's why he could tell where he was. Halfway or thereabouts. Had he tried to figure out how far he had to go without knowing this, He would have given up figuring, and the race would have seemed endless. When this was over, he wanted to ask someone in the committee how they planned races. He hadn't thought of it before. When he struggled uphill, was that a street some committee member thought would be interesting? Or was it a detour from a route they had wanted, but then changed when some businesses said they couldn't manage all the difficulties such a race brought? When a downhill slope propelled him to a speed he couldn't reach without sprinting, his feet nearly bounding out of his well-tied shoes, did they think of this too? He imagined how his excitement might be misunderstood as anger or confusion, but let him assure them, honored committee, he wanted to know what went into such a race. All the planning, the permits, the negotiations, if there were any, everything they had done for him had to be considered and appreciated. He swung between emotions like a pendulum, thanks for the city on one side, doubt in his abilities on the other, and in the middle, where the weight rested when it slowed, determination. Then he found the finish line. He went to a man with a stopwatch and showed him his number. The man wrote down his time, exactly 5 hours, a little better than his practice runs before. Just as he foretold, he almost cried when a woman gave him a donut and a little paper cup of water. They tasted better than he thought possible. As good as they were, he didn't savor them. How was it? The woman asked when he had finished. This question seemed so incredibly important that he took his time answering, to think and cough and drink more water. Good. Well, it's my first time. Was my first time. He smiled, tired. She laughed and said good, then turned to welcome other runners. Once he recovered, he stood by the water coolers and gave water to the finishing runners. Others had done this. Now he did his duty. His shirt that had rustled when dry now clung to him full of sweat. He made another promise, that he would wait until the race was over. This was easier to do than it sounds. He cheered for the runners that arrived, gave them food and drink, and talked to those that had finished earlier about how their run went. In 30 minutes, the last person arrived. That was Building Character by Philip Ballerscheff. Remember to like and subscribe. If you'd like to read along, there's a link to the story in the description.